You are in Jerusalem. The air smells of sweat, dust, and dried blood. The midday sun was still burning the city's pale stones just a few minutes ago. But now, something is wrong. Very wrong. The light is fading, not like an ordinary cloud covering the sky, not like the beginning of a storm. This is different. Darkness is swallowing Jerusalem whole, slowly, heavily, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And on top of that hill, someone is dying. You hear the sound of wood creaking under the weight of suspended bodies. The wind blows between the crosses erected outside the city walls. Roman soldiers squint, trying to see through that impossible shadow. Some laugh nervously. Others can no longer hide their fear, because that shouldn't happen. Historians estimate that Jerusalem could exceed 100,000 people during the Jewish Passover. Pilgrims filled the narrow streets near the temple. The smell of sacrificed lambs came from the areas around Mount Moriah. The constant sound of prayers echoed through the courts of Herod's temple. But now, even the crowd seems silent. And this is perhaps the scariest detail of all. The silence. Mark 15 describes that darkness fell over the entire land from the 6th hour until the 9th hour. 3 hours. 3 whole hours in which Jerusalem was plunged into what people at the time probably interpreted as divine judgment. And you feel it in your body. The temperature dropped. The wind changed. People start to look up. Some women cry softly. A man near the cross whispers words from a psalm, trying to control the tremor in his voice. Children are pulled closer to their parents. But no one leaves, because everyone feels like they are seeing something that should never happen before human eyes. And then you look at the man in the center. Your body is destroyed, the back torn by the Roman scourge. Evidence suggests that the flagellation used by soldiers could expose muscle and even bone fragments before the crucifixion even began. Blood slowly runs down the legs stuck to the rough wood. Every breath feels like a war against your own body. But there is something even more disturbing. He doesn't look defeated. Even though he dies, there is authority in his eyes. And this starts to scare the soldiers. Archaeologists discovered dozens of nails and fragments from first-century Roman crucifixions, showing how Rome turned executions into a public spectacle of terror. The cross was not just for killing. It served to humiliate, to destroy hope before the crowd. But here, the effect is being the opposite. Because the more that darkness covers Jerusalem, the more the crowd feels that it is not Rome who is in control of that moment. And then it happens. From the top of the cross, through parched lips and lungs crushed by their own weight, a voice breaks the silence. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. And immediately the earth shakes. Before darkness fell, Jerusalem still seemed too alive to realize that it was on the brink of eternal rupture. You walk through the cramped city streets during Easter. Their shoulders almost touch pilgrims coming from Galilee, Judea, the Decapolis, perhaps even from Jewish communities far from the Mediterranean. The sound of sandals against stone mixes with the bleating of lambs, the murmur of prayers, the friction of coins on money changers' tables. The temple dominates everything. Its white stones reflect the light so strongly that you have to squint your eyes. The complex renovated by Herod was one of the greatest architectural works in the Jewish world, with enormous limestone blocks carefully carved. Archaeological evidence shows that some Herodian stones on the Temple Mount weighed tens of tons, fitted together with impressive precision. But behind the beauty, there was tension. Roman soldiers were alert. During Passover, Jerusalem was not just a holy city, it was a dangerous city. The party remembered liberation from Egypt, and for a people dominated by Rome, this memory could turn into revolt. Therefore, the military presence increased. Antonia Fortress watched the temple like a stone shadow. And here's what many forget. Jesus didn't die in a hidden corner of history. He died in the nerve center of a city full, watched, charged with religious and political fear. Look closer. Outside the walls, Golgotha was not a distant and silent hill as many paintings suggest. It was probably close to a public road where people entered and left the city. Rome chose visible places. Crucifixion was propaganda written on human bodies. This is what happens to those who defy the empire. You smell the burning garbage, the dust raised by animals, the blood from the sacrifices in the temple carried by the wind. In the distance, the priests continue their rituals. Lambs are still prepared. Family Ilias still hope to celebrate Easter. But at the same time that lambs are offered inside the city, outside of it, an innocent man is suspended between heaven and earth. And this overlap changes everything. The crowd still doesn't understand. Some scoff, others just watch, like someone who has been dragged into a scene they can't leave. Women cry. Soldiers gamble, watch, wait for death to do its slow work. But the entire city is about to discover that that cross isn't just a Roman execution. It's the point where the sky starts to touch the earth, and the earth starts to shake. You are in Golgotha now, not as a visitor, not as someone looking from afar. You're close enough to hear the condemned's breath hitching in their chests, close enough to smell the metallic smell of blood mixed with the rough wood, the soldier's sweat, and the hot dust kicked up by the crowd's feet. The cross is not isolated in an empty landscape. Rome did not waste executions in hidden places. Crucifixions were carried out near busy paths in front of human eyes because the aim was not just to kill. It was teaching fear. Archaeological evidence shows that the only first-century crucifixion victim found with a nail preserved in the bone, Yehohanan, had been brutally and publicly fixed, revealing how Rome turned bodies into living warnings. And when you look at Jesus, you understand that that tree was a Roman message. But something is reversing the message. The soldiers expected pleas, insults, despair. They were used to men breaking on the inside before dying on the outside. But this man prays, forgive. Give care to your mother. He speaks with an authority that doesn't match someone nailed to wood. What most people miss is this. The crowd wasn't just made up of enemies. There were curious people. Pilgrims who perhaps had heard Jesus teach in the temple a few days earlier. Women who followed him from Galilee. People who saw him heal the sick, touch the unclean, restore dignity to those who had already been forgotten, and now they see the same, almost unrecognizable man. You notice Maria in the distance. There is not enough dramatization for this moment. Just a mother looking at her son. Her body is there, but something inside her seems to have stopped. John 19 shows that Jesus still thinks about her, even as he struggles to breathe. That doesn't sound like weakness. It feels like love going through pain. Around, some still mock. Others can no longer do so, because the darkness keeps increasing. The ground beneath your feet feels colder. The voices subside. Even the soldiers start looking at each other. They know death. They know torture. They know fear. But they don't know that. And at the center of it all, Jesus remains suspended between the city and the sky, as if all of Jerusalem was waiting for its next breath. Then the voice comes, not strong like a preacher in front of the crowd, not clean, not easy, not human enough to seem ordinary. The voice comes out torn, passing through a dry throat, compressed lungs, pain accumulated for hours. I'm thirsty. You feel the weight of these words. It's not just a physical detail. John 19 shows that Jesus says this near the end, when everything is finished in the body. The tongue sticks to the roof of the mouth. The lost blood left the skin cold. Every second requires strength. And then someone holds up a sponge soaked in sour wine attached to a sprig of hyssop. Look closer. The hyssop was not random. It was a plant linked to purification used in ancient aspersion rituals. In Exodus, the blood of the Passover lamb was applied with hyssop to the gates of Israel. And now, during Passover, before a city full of lambs being sacrificed, the true lamb is given sour wine through a humble stalk. The revelation is silent, but devastating. The cross is not interrupting Easter. The cross is revealing its center. Soldiers may not understand this. For them, this is just the end of another execution, a weakening body, a sentence served. But you notice that the atmosphere has changed. The crowd is smaller in voice, bigger in fear. The mockery lost strength. The darkness weighed heavily on everyone. And then Jesus speaks again. It is finished. It's not a sigh of defeat. It's a statement. In the Roman world, the word could carry the idea of a debt paid, a task completed, something completed without anything missing. And that changes everything, because Jesus doesn't say, "I'm finished." He says, something has been completed. What happens next changes everything. You look at his face. The pain is still there, but there is a strange peace, as if in the place where everyone sees failure, he is seeing complete obedience, as if that wood, those nails, that darkness, that thirst, everything had reached the exact point the entire story was heading towards. Then he raises his voice one last time. "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And in that moment, you feel like it wasn't Rome who took his life. He handed it over. The body hangs. Breathing stops. Silence falls heavily on Golgotha, and before anyone can understand what just happened, the earth begins to shake. At the same time that Jesus' body lies motionless outside the walls, something happens inside the city. Far from Golgotha, beyond the cramped streets, beyond the smell of dust and fear, beyond the confused pilgrims staring up at the dark sky, the temple still stands. Its huge stones continue to reflect the little light that remains. Priests still move through the sacred courts. The Easter ritual did not stop. But then the ground shakes. You imagine the sound first. Not thunder in the sky, but a groan from beneath the rocks. The speakers vibrate. Bronze vessels tremble. Doves trapped in baskets flap their wings in despair. Men accustomed to the order of the cult hold on to the walls to avoid falling. And then comes the tear. Matthew, Mark, and Luke record a detail that is impossible to ignore. The veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom, not from the bottom up, as if human hands had pulled the fabric from top to bottom, as if heaven itself had opened what no man could open. Look closer. This veil was not a decorative curtain. It was a sacred barrier. It separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, the most feared and revered space in the temple. Only the high priest could enter there, and only once a year, on the Day of Atonement. The separation was not symbolic for them. It was spiritual reality, fabric, space, fear, and holiness. Scholars estimate that temple textiles were made with fine linen and dyed thread, possibly in blue, purple, and scarlet, colors associated with the ancient tabernacle. Later, Jewish tradition describes heavy veils, crafted with great care, not something that would be torn by accident like old clothing, but in that instant, he opens up, and that changes everything. Inside the temple, someone must have seen it. Perhaps a priest holding serving utensils, maybe a Levite standing too close to forget that sound for the rest of his life. The fabric separating, the barrier giving way, the most inaccessible place in Israel being exposed at the exact moment Jesus dies outside the city. What most people miss is this: Jesus' death didn't just move people on Golgotha. It struck at the center of Jerusalem's religious system. The cross was outside the walls, but the impact entered the temple. The condemned man rejected by the leaders died outside, while inside the most sacred sign of separation was torn. The city perhaps didn't know how to interpret it yet, but fear knew. Because when the veil is torn, it is not just a curtain that is torn. It's a message. The previously closed path is being opened. The place where man could not enter is now touched by a death that seems larger than the temple itself. And here is the expectation-shattering revelation. At that moment, the spiritual center of Jerusalem was no longer in the stone altar, nor in the priests, nor in the visible rituals. It was in the wounded body of a man hanging on a cross. The ground still shakes. Stones break. People scream in the streets, and inside the temple, where everything was supposed to remain controlled, the ancient order has just been torn in half. The fear starts with the soldiers. You see it first in the centurion's face, a man trained not to tremble. A Roman officer accustomed to blood, screams, public executions, and bodies hanging until death comes slowly. He has seen men curse gods. He has seen condemned men spit on their executioners. He has seen crowds revel in pain, but he never saw the earth react to the death of a man. The ground moves beneath your sandals. The wood of the crosses creaks. Stones roll down the slope. Darkness still weighs down on Jerusalem like a huge hand covering the city, and for a moment, not even Rome seems big. Matthew 27 says that the centurion and those guarding Jesus were terrified when they saw the earthquake and everything that had happened. And then that man, representative of the empire, says what the religious people were unable to say. Truly, this was the Son of God. But that's not all. Fear does not stay on Golgotha. He goes down through the city, enter through the streets, pass by the pilgrims who are going to the temple. It reaches homes where families hold scared children. It reaches priests trying to understand the torn veil. It reaches people who, just a few hours before, might have cried out for crucifixion. Now, no one screams. Luke 23 describes that the crowds that had gathered to see the spectacle returned beating their breasts. This gesture was not simple sadness. It was a sign of lament, guilt, and spiritual amazement. They arrived to watch an execution. They were returning like those who realized too late that they had seen something sacred being hurt. Archaeological evidence from first-century Jerusalem shows stone streets, drainage systems, and areas near the temple where crowds roam. They actually circulated during parties. Imagine those paths now, not full of celebration, but of slow steps, faces down, hands on chests. And then the feeling of ending spreads, not into the world like explosion or chaos, something worse, a silent end, as if the city had lost the right to speak, as if each person was hearing a question inside that they didn't want to answer. What if we kill the righteous? The soldiers collect their tools. Priests try to preserve order. The disciples remain broken. The women watch from afar. But no one leaves that day the same, because Jerusalem has just felt something that neither walls, nor rituals, nor empire can control. The death of Jesus did not just produce mourning, it produced fear. Perhaps the most difficult question is not what happened to Jerusalem that day. Maybe it's because it still affects you. Because deep down, the darkness over the city was not just the absence of light, it was a revelation. It showed that humanity can be surrounded by religion, tradition, sacred architecture, chants, festivals, and rituals, and still not recognize God when He is before their eyes. Do you feel this? Jerusalem had the temple. There were priests. It had scriptures. There were sacrifices. He had a memory of ancient miracles. Archaeologists discovered structures, inscriptions, and monumental remains that confirmed the greatness of that city in the Second Temple period. But that day, the most religious city on earth saw the saint die outside its walls. And this raises a question: how many times do we also keep everything in order on the outside, while inside we ignore the voice of God? The cross reveals something that no one wanted to admit. The human problem has never been a lack of evidence. It was a lack of surrender. They saw the darkness. They felt the earthquake. They heard the last words. They found out about the torn veil. Even so, many would only understand later. And maybe it's like that with us. Sometimes God allows the light to disappear for a moment, not to destroy us, but to expose what we trusted. The control, the appearance, the strength, the opinion of others. Religion without surrender. That afternoon, Jerusalem lost its certainties, and when everything shook, only one thing remained standing: the meaning of the cross. Jesus didn't just die in front of Roman soldiers. He died in the face of human fear, human guilt, human violence, empty religion, and the silence of those who no longer knew what to do with their own soul. What most people miss is this: Jesus' death was not God's failure. It was God reaching into the darkest point of the human experience and saying, I've come this far too. Even the pain, until rejection, until abandonment, until the last breath. And if He was there, then no darkness of yours is too deep for Him to enter. And now, the silence after the cross. You see Jerusalem darkened, wounded, not fully understanding what just happened. People return home, beating their chests. The soldiers remain restless. The temple is still standing, but something invisible has been opened forever. The cross seems like the end, but it's not. It is the place where God transforms death into a path, guilt into forgiveness, fear into an invitation. Jesus' last breath did not close the story. He opened a door that no sin, no shame, and no darkness could close. And perhaps today, the question is simple, but impossible to avoid. When everything gets dark in your life, who do you give your spirit to? If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to remember that the cross was not defeat. It was love until the last breath. And answer me in the comments, what moved you most at this moment in Jerusalem?